He often told us, if not for numerous nisim, he never would have survived. But two things gave him the koyach to go on. First was his faith that his kala, my mother, would be waiting somewhere for him when this was over. And the second was his amunah in the Levaya Shalom. He told us the story of the Nazi guard who was standing over him as he was digging a ditch. And the guard said to him, "Did you kill somebody?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Then why are you here?" My father was quiet, and he says, "Is there a God in this world?" And my father said, "Yes." And he walked away. 10 minutes later, he came back, and again, he says, "Did you rob somebody? Is there a God in this world?" And again, he said, stronger, "Yes." And he kept coming back again and again. And every time he said to him, "Is there a God in this world?" And he was taunting him, until my father screamed, "Yes, there is." And this is what kept him going. Despite having watched the butcher Mengele Yimach Shemoy, so give his mitten finger and sent his mother in front of his eyes to the crematoriums, and despite watching the karbonas falling all around him, he kept his amunah and his Torah. After the liberation, he walked with torn shoes from town to town, from station to station, until he found his bashert. He had dreamed of a wedding with 200 yeshiva bachurim and his rosh yeshivas and his family. But now he had barely a family left and barely a minyan for the chasana. But he married my mother. It was 1946. He left for Paris and then the United States. And this ended the second stage of his life. The third stage was the bulk of his life after the war, coming here to Los Angeles, starting with nothing, raising a family, building a business, supporting Yiddishkeit in this city, all the things that I spoke about earlier. But he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot his roots in the Altaheim. He believed in the concept of Asei L'Chorav. He became close first to Rav Halberstam Zechreinu Livracha, and then to Rav Isaacson Zechreinu Livracha. His bond with Rav Isaacson would be impossible for me to describe. He loved him. He loved what he stood for, his Mesiras Nefesh for the Klal. When other Rabbanim came to the city of Los Angeles, he opened his house for them, whether it was Satmar or Bobiv or Dej, and the list goes on and on. The door was always open. Certainly those years were not without adversity. There were difficult times. He lost his first grandchild, Mendy, who worked with him side by side for so many years at such a young age. He lost his brother-in-law, my uncle Lazer, that he was so close to for so many years. They had lived together in the same house in the early days for so long, but they had a special connection that was evidenced by the fact that we spent every Yom Tov, every Pesach Seder, for so many years together. Before he was nifter, my father was in the hospital 6-8 weeks every day by his side. It was a tremendous loss for him. And his only brother, his brother Matki, that he spoke to almost daily, he was his partner, his consultant, he was his connection to the home that he had lost. He was his confidant. I remember that when Matki was having Agmas Nefesh from one of his nursing homes, and my father said, "I want you to lease it out," and he didn't want to, and he said no, and he said yes, and he fought with him, and he brought him somebody to lease it from him. And 10 meetings, 20 meetings, they sat 50 meetings until he finally got it done and got it off his head, because he cared that he was watching him having so much Agmas Nefesh and Saras. And his brother thanked him afterwards. It was such a relief when he could finally be patur of this problem. He cared for him more than anything, and he only wanted to help him. And when he lost him, it was a terrible, terrible loss for him. But he overcame all of these things and accepted them along with the many brachas that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave him. And finally, the last stage of his life was zikna, old age. And this was perhaps his greatest challenge. A man who was so dynamic, so strong, such a moving force in this world, now needed help just to walk. He had difficulty speaking. He lost his koyach achayim. His energy was gone. But he accepted his matziv with such grace and such dignity. He was never bitter, never resentful. He had his family. He had my mother that he still adored and treated like a queen. Every day when he came in from the backyard, he still clipped a flower from the bushes to bring in to her. He had his children, his 7 grandchildren, his 14 great-grandchildren, Kein Yirbu, to shep nachas from. And he had his Gemara, his Chavrusas, his Sfarim, and he could look back at all he accomplished and be proud. And through it all, he kept that warm smile that he gave to everyone who greeted him. So how did my father get through the trials and tribulations of his life, in these arba milin of his life? Arba milin mi olichoi. And the answer is, he was mutal al kanfei ashchina. The Rebbeinu Shalom carried him through it all. He always kept the Rebbeinu Shalom close to his heart. And what gave him strength was his amunah, his bitachon, and his Torah. It may be that he's no longer here in the physical sense, but in truth, he still lives on. He lives through his children and the doiros that will Yirtzeh Hashem follow and be mamshich b'drachav. He lives on through the learning in the yeshivas that he built, in the koilim that he supported. Having learned from my father the midah of hakaras hatoiv, there are people I must thank before I conclude for all their help and their devotion to both my parents, especially in these last few years. My Aunt Matzah was always there with caring and concern and advice, always visiting and helping in so many ways. Oli Bitterman, Dina Ziskin, Ellen Schnur, Leon Zvika Brenner, and many others who have been more than friends, more like family in their giving Lifnei Meshura Sadin. I have to thank Rabbi Hennig, Rav Yoina Landau, Rav Kribus, for giving my father such chizuk, and for giving him the schus to be able to learn his beloved Torah until the end. I have to thank Rabbi Kiva Schlissel, one of my father's closest friends and his close chavrusa. I have to thank my father's attendants, Ike and Eddie, for the care that they gave him beyond all expectation, for which we will always be grateful. Eva and Shapsi, Shirley and Irving, Evie and I want to thank you for being there when we couldn't be. I want to thank Benny Mandel, Stan and Bela Weiss. We appreciate that you came in from New York to be here at this time. It means a lot to the family. And of course, we in the family thank you, Mommy, for inspiring Daddy his whole life. You motivated him to achieve, to work hard, to support his causes. You stood behind him in everything he did. He gave you respect and love until the last day. You always put a smile on his face and you treated him like a king. The Gemara in Brachos tells us, Ein oimrim lifnei ames, ela dvarav shel ames. If the Rebbeinu Shalom could give the mace a koyach hadibur for a few brief moments, we have to say over those words that we know he would have wanted to say. If he were here now, he would tell us not to cry,